More on Apple repairs, Qualcomm, Microsoft, and ARM. This is MacVoices. MacVoices is sponsored by Upstart, fair and fast personal loans. Go to upstart.com/MacVoices and find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part 2 in a 3-part MacVoices live conversation. This time we finish up some discussion of Apple repair experiences, both in and out of the Apple Store. And then we turn our attention to the story about Qualcomm and ARM and Microsoft and what it might mean for the future of virtualization on the M1 chips. Let's go right back and let the panel do the talking.
There's a lot of great shops out there, but there's also the fact that so many people do not live near an Apple store. I mean, there's folks that have to drive 2 and 3 hours to go to an Apple store, where there might be a local repair shop that's so much closer by that would be more ideal to work with. So I think there's the case, because Apple's being smart and strategic of where they put their stores, and it makes total sense that they aren't going to put them in areas that they don't think the store isn't going to prosper. So that's why you got these other third-party shops. And I think, if anything, Apple is going to recognize is the fact that this is going to help the customer in the long run by allowing them to be able to do these repairs, regardless if they're an authorized repair shop or not.
But what makes that comment really interesting to me, David? My closest Apple store is about 50 minutes away, and I don't know. I mean, I've been there and I've taken things there to be repaired. And most of the time, I have to make a second trip, which is not unusual. But at least the last time I had a repair to be done on a MacBook Pro, I talked to Apple directly, and they sent me the package, and
right.
I shipped it back, and it was back in a frightening amount of time. Now, right now, I know it's pandemic time, and so the shipping may take a whole lot longer than the repair. But in that experience, I mean, it was overnighted to them, and I had information on the website about exactly what they were doing and where my MacBook was in the repair process, and it was back. I don't think I'm exaggerating, in 4 or 5 days, and I don't know that I would have had that kind of turnaround if they could have done it in the Apple Store. I'm not sure I would have had any better turnaround. I might have had worse turnaround. And that is not putting down anybody at the Apple Store. So please don't, jump down my throat.
Well,
that's not the point.
A lot of times the Apple Store will just do exactly that and send it.
They ship it right from the store.
I think it's to Austin. And in fact, I've had this, third-party place I go to. Sometimes they've had to do that, but I'm kind of happy to let them do that too. They've already got all the boxes on hand. So I think, like Apple had to send you a box, right? And then you send it back, and then so that's at least an extra day for just the empty box to get to you. So if you take it in, they can get it out right away.
I just
they can get it out.
Did you say the Apple Store was 15 minutes or 50 minutes from you?
50.
Yeah, okay, that's a big difference.
50. Yeah. Jeff?
Chuck, I've seen even faster turnarounds where I've had to take my MacBook Pro in for something, had a morning Genius Bar appointment, and they told me we have to send it to Austin for the fix. And so it goes off on that day's shipment. The next evening, I picked up my computer at the Apple Store. It had already come back and been fixed. Yeah. Which, I mean, to me, that's insane that they could turn it around that fast, including shipping. But there you go. Yeah. And for me, then it's even better because I have an Apple Store that's like 5 minutes away.
I get the same exact experience with this MacBook Pro I have here. I ended up having a system board failure. I shipped it out to Austin, and then they shipped it back within a reasonable amount of time. So.
I guess this whole debate over the repair thing, maybe I'm missing it, but I just feel like Apple has done an amazing job for people with an Apple Store close to them, and in my experience, with an Apple Store not close to them. And I mean, half the time you can't get your car back, and your deal is right here. And, you drive your car in and, okay, it'll be 3 or 4 days, Mr. Joyner. Okay. Now the one difference is, of course, they can give you a loaner. But beyond that,
what's wrong with your car? I mean, I usually don't have to, very rare to have a car leave more than 1 day for me. Unless there's, so maybe once when it had a major, problem, but.
Yeah. It depends, obviously, Jim, on a lot of things, how old your car is and, a million other variables. But
my car is 15 years old.
Wow.
So I have this one weird hack that gets me consistently amazing and fast service at the tire place that I go to and the mechanic I go to. I'm always nice when I go in. I found out what kind of beer the mechanics like, and I bring it to them.
That is not the hack I thought you were going with, but that's a good one.
It is.
I mean, they're excited because here shows up a case of cold beer for them, and I always bring it like after I've gotten the car, so that But
Jeff, the good news is we fixed your car. The bad news is we fixed it with parts from a 1983 Ford Fiesta, and that we spray painted. And they look great.
It'll be great. But yeah, it's amazing what a gift like that will do. And of course, I'm helping myself out, but I'm doing something nice for them at the same time, and everyone wins.
I had a friend that did a really clever hack for finding a mechanic. He had this Italian car, and gosh, I'm blanking on the name. It's not a Fiat. It's not a high-end one. They were out of the country for a long time. Now they're back. I think it starts with an A. I can't remember.
Alfa Romeo?
Alfa Romeo. That's it.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
yes. So he had an Alfa Romeo, and so he needed to find a mechanic, and so he got an idea. He looked in the newspaper. This was back when there was such a thing as newspaper, and looked for people selling, used ones. And then he called them, and he's like, apologize, I don't want to buy your car, but I'm curious if you have a mechanic that you like. And so he found a great mechanic that way. In fact, it turned out that the mechanic had been an Alfa Romeo engineer, or a field engineer. He was from Italy, and he had moved to California as a field engineer, and then they shut down their American operations and said, you got to come back to Italy. And he said, no, I don't want to go back to Italy. I'm staying in California. So he opened up his own shop. So he knew everything about these cars. And he was like, oh, yes, in 1985, they adjusted this thing. But then in 1986, the flapper, had to go. He knew everything about it. It was amusing just to listen to him.
So I guess, that's a bunch of different takes. There've been a number of comments here in the chat room I want to make sure we get to. Brad pointed out that if Apple will offer the tools and parts and instructions, it may no longer be cost effective to actually do it, which, that's an interesting point. And Webb says, and I agree, Webb, I'd like to see that Apple Depot repair facility. I bet it's pretty amazing. Yeah. Bob says Apple's after sales service is one of the best around, and that's certainly been my experience, Bob. I know, I'm sure there are people out there that would disagree, but they've treated me well. Let's see. Webb points out, rightly so, that right now car repair has to do with parts availability. It's kind of scary what's going on out there. And Mike has just identified now that we're going to be guessing car brands as a regular part of the show.
And he's the one who guessed the correct brand.
Yeah. What the people want. I mean, we got to. At the Thanksgiving season, I think it's important to recognize that the audience is always right, and what they want is more MacVoices live panelists guessing obscure car brands wherever possible. So I think it's a new feature. It's just that's how easy it is to create new content these days.
Probably have a limited run on that.
Jeff, Jeff on the chat, you?
That's a different Jeff, I think.
So I'm interested in his comment that he says he went to an Apple store, wanted to buy a cable, and was told he needed to buy an appointment. Has anybody else
I have the opposite experience of which is what I normally do at the Apple Store. I was at the Apple Store in Honolulu. I walked in, picked up a Belkin AirTag lanyard off the shelf, scanned it with my trusty Apple Store app, left my receipt on the screen, walked out unmolested, touchless transaction. If you have the Apple Store app, there's never a reason that you should have to make an appointment or talk to anyone to obtain your merchandise.
That's what I thought.
I can shed some light
I wanted to ask why Jeff said that.
I can shed some light on that.
Okay.
So what Apple has been doing during the pandemic, and it varies by area based on what current restrictions are in place.
Yes.
So there are some areas where you have to have an appointment because they have a strict limit on how many people they can have in the stores, how many people they can have doing like face-to-face interactions. And there was a long stretch, like here in Colorado, where if you wanted to do something in the Apple Store, you had to have an appointment.
Yep. New York too.
So the best way to do a purchase was to open up the app on your iPhone and make the purchase through there and do curbside pickup, because there were more slots open for those appointments than there were for appointments actually meeting with someone to make a purchase.
I guess I'm wondering when the last time Jeff was in an Apple Store, because he says that, because it hasn't been like that here for like maybe 6 months or at least 4 or 5 months.
I was going to say, Mike, I just bought an Apple Watch last Thursday, and I walked into the store, didn't make an appointment. I didn't because I get a business discount. I then need to scan my QR code. So she saw, the guy says, "Oh yeah, let me put your name on the list. It'll probably be about 3:30," and I got there at 3:00. I'm like, "Oh great, I got to wait for a half hour." So look around the store. Not even 5 minutes later, someone freed up and they came and helped me. So yeah, so that's kind of surprising to hear that. But like you said, it varies in different areas around the country, depending on the rules with the latest of the pandemic. But seems here it's kind of freed up a little bit. I mean, there were other times where I did have to have an appointment when no one were at the heavy point of the pandemic. So
I'm waiting for Bob in the chat room to respond, but he says at my local Apple Store, they're still controlling entry. So
yeah, UK might be a little more restrictive. Yeah.
Right. And then in the United States, it can vary from city to city and county to county.
State to state.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
he's in
the UK.
I was in the UK. So that's going to throw things up.
Yeah.
I was at the one of the New York City Apple stores at Fulton Street in the Oculus Mall at the World Trade Center, and I happened to be walking through there on the day that they flipped from appointment only to freely enter, and they still had the signage up, and I sort of peeked at it, and the genius waved me in, or the staffer waved me in. I said, "I don't have an appointment." He said, "Oh no. Today we just changed it." But it was for quite some time. To Jeff's point, that entry and that timed entry was in place, which is interesting because it's a capacity control for sure, but it already was the most touchless possible retail experience, except if you were doing something that physically required the Apple staffer to put their hands on you or your merchandise. But most of the time, you didn't need to have a within 6 foot interaction with anybody to do what you needed to do. If you needed help with something, or if you were there for a training session, that's obviously very different. But buying a cable, again, it's a wander in, wander out. So they were pretty well prepared for the post-pandemic or the late pandemic flavor of bricks and mortar retail, because it was already as close to touchless as you could get.
When was that, Mike?
I want to say that was last year.
In 2020? They were already opening it up?
I think it might have been in the fall of 2020. That can't be right.
So
can't be right.
Probably...
It has to have been in like the spring of this year. It has to have been in like March or April of 2021.
Right. Okay, that makes...
I'd have to look at my Foursquare history to find out.
It was something like April, I think, in Los Angeles, because I've only been in an Apple store once since the pandemic started, and I think it was May, and I remember it was like so weird and to be inside the Apple store, and I was like, oh my gosh, here's all these products that I've only read about, and I can see them in person, even a Mac Pro.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Upstart. Fair and fast personal loans. Go to upstart.com/MacVoices to find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments. If you're carrying a credit balance month after month, it can feel like you're in a never-ending cycle of debt with no end in sight. Why not change that for the new year with Upstart? Upstart is fair and fast personal loans from $1,000 to $50,000, and the process is done all online. Upstart gives you a smarter rate by looking at things like your income, current employment, and credit history, and not just your credit score, to give you that smarter rate. Upstart can help you get control of your debt, whether it's credit card debt, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses. And again, all done online from the privacy of your computer. Find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today when you go to upstart.com/MacVoices. That's Upstart, upstart.com/MacVoices. Don't forget to use my URL to let them know I sent you. Loan amounts will be determined based on your credit, income, and certain other information provided in your loan application. Go to upstart.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Upstart for their support of MacVoices.
Yeah.
Craig in the chat room says has been to Indianapolis, Tampa, and Columbus, Ohio, and all were free reign with masks encouraged but not mandated.
All states that are open for that.
Yeah,
I guess I thought every place in the United States was, all the Apple stores were open, but maybe I'm wrong.
Bob was talking about the lead store, and he was saying, they take your temperature there. And Brad says other nearby stores at the time in his area were not taking their temperatures. All the staff wear a mask, even though it's no longer mandatory in England, from Bob. So, there you go. It's all over the place, depending on local jurisdictions.
Yep.
Jim, you brought to the table a couple stories that we wanted to chat about, and I'll let you run with them.
I better go look them up.
Yeah, well, the first one was the Qualcomm deal that allegedly has an exclusive deal with Microsoft for Windows on ARM.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, assuming it's true. Because the story, and I saw it in a couple outlets, but they probably all came from one place. So the story is that apparently Qualcomm has an exclusive deal with Microsoft for Windows on ARM, but that it's going to expire soon, whatever that means. So, then Windows could be on other ARM machines, not Qualcomm, which maybe could include Apple Silicon M1 machine. So I think that would be interesting if Windows was available officially. And we've never had this explanation before that, there was a contractual issue with Microsoft not allowing that. And I guess I'm still not going to say that I know that this is true, but that's what the reporting is today.
Well, so far, Microsoft was not allowing ARM, and you only could get ARM if you wanted to use Parallels on the Mac with a insider edition of Windows, whether it be Windows 10 or Windows 11 for that matter. So it's still a beta, so they don't have an official version that will work on a Mac. But to be able to run it natively, that would be definitely interesting thing to see what happens. Apple, at first we had thought that Microsoft was just being resistant to it. They didn't want Windows to run on an Apple Mac, but maybe this story will kind of open the door. And I'd be curious to see too, as I'm a big Parallels user. I think virtualization has gotten so much better with it, and to the fact that why not? Why not? You can't get it to work. I'd like to see if there's ways of simulating older versions, because sometimes you have to go back and be able to use those. And we can't keep Intel Macs forever.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Chuck. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike. Because
I was just going to say one thing to David's point. You bring up an interesting use case of wanting to be able not only to run the ARM-enabled version of Windows, but older versions of Windows. As far as we know, there isn't going to be a way effectively to run, say, Windows 8 or on M1 hardware because the emulation layer won't support those hardware level commands of the Intel chip. It's too bad, but
it really is.
But it's one of those things that you might as well keep an Intel, some sort of flavor of Intel machine around anyway, even if it's cheap Wintel box, because then you can use VirtualBox or Microsoft Hypervisor or VMware or Parallels to do exactly that. But having an officially supported flavor of Windows on ARM that you could run on your Mac with some assistance would be great. A lot of value in that, even if you can't go back to the older versions.
Well, and doesn't the Windows that is on ARM, like on a Surface and whatnot, it will run 32-bit old Windows apps even on the current version, which is, I think, what a lot of the issue of people want to run old 32-bit Windows software. Probably most of the Windows stuff that's new Windows stuff, there's probably a Macintosh equivalent anyway. But people want to run some legacy, Windows software. Maybe it's an internal, company thing or something like that. So this would, provide a way that could happen.
So
sure.
Brad may have answered the question in the chat room, but David, I want to make sure that I understand. So you're saying right now there is a way, it sounds like it's cobbled together and definitely not officially supported, but there is a way to run Windows on an M1 Mac. Is that a correct statement?
People are doing it.
Yeah. Parallels does it.
Yes,
but not well. And
it wasn't doing it well. But I think version 17 just came out not too long ago, and I played around with it a little bit. It's improved. I mean, I agree with you, Mike. It was not great when I first installed Windows 10, and it was horrid.
What does not well mean? Does it crash? Stuff doesn't run?
Slow. It just was not a good experience. But it
didn't they have to start from scratch?
Parallels?
No, they're using there's a Microsoft ARM version of Windows, but Microsoft hasn't done anything on it to optimize it for M1 or debug it.
Brad says I run Windows 11 ARM under Parallels, but I didn't think they get any blessing from Redmond, which is the understanding.
Yeah, and he's also saying no boot camp, which I don't think that will ever happen.
That'll never happen. No, boot camp's history.
So let's flip this around. What would be the advantage? I mean, okay, the M1 chips are hot, and they're going to get hotter, it seems. This is going to be a really big thing. Microsoft didn't seem to have strong objections to running Windows under Boot Camp. So, short of contractual obligations like the one referenced in the story, if it is coming to an end soon, I mean, isn't it in their best interests to, even if it's not a native operating system, to at least allow virtualization on?
I think that's what makes this story interesting, because it was kind of a head scratcher. Why wouldn't Microsoft do this? They didn't seem to mind before. It's potential extra revenue and market share, and Microsoft is no longer the Windows everything. We have to embrace, extend, and extinguish. So the story is kind of, I guess that's to me the most, because I don't really need to run Windows, but to me it's interesting because it was sort of it was a puzzle. Like, well, why isn't Microsoft doing this? It seems like, there's going to, already a lot of M1 Macs. There's going to be more. Yeah, why not? And maybe this is the reason. Well, they had a secret deal that, that was probably made before Microsoft knew that Apple was going to jump into the ARM market. So they probably didn't make this deal with the idea that, there's going to be a popular ARM machine that's not included with this.
Microsoft has always been about being everywhere they can, and when they had their leadership change, they really embraced the idea of being on everything in whatever form they could be. I think Microsoft has always really liked that you could run Windows natively on a Mac, and
well, since 2005.
Since 2005, but in computer terms, that's forever.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, based on this new report, I'm sure that Microsoft's holding back has been because of a deal. And as soon as that deal is up, they probably have already done the work so that they can just roll out whatever updates they need, and then it becomes an Armapalooza, and Apple gets to be part of that as well.
And ARM's race.
I think so.
I like Armapalooza. Don't get me wrong. Armapalooza is fantastic.
That is good.
I shared in the chat and in our chat the Parallels blog post from very recently, October, so within the past 6 weeks, about some of the complexities now that the Windows 10 Insider Preview is no longer available. It's Windows 11, and it's Windows 11 Insider Preview, and it does require a trusted password module, a trusted program module, either virtual or actual hardware, and so that creates complexity, and that's creating a challenge for running the virtual Windows OS on the Mac. I think it's amazing. I mean, Jeff mentioned like since 2005, which was the Intel Macs with Boot Camp. I think it's amazing that we have 3 or more, 3.5 if you count crossover, fully supported, fully featured emulators or virtualization solutions for Windows, not emulators, but actual virtualization, that ran on Intel Macs forever, and in fact on PowerPC Macs before that through emulation. That we've had this capability for so long, now having to sort of grapple with not having ready access to it, or not having such an easy time of installing and running Windows on your Mac. It's time to sort of think about like, well, what does that mean in a world where most things are in the browser, where remote virtual desktops or hosted Windows OS solutions are readily available. Like, what do we really need to be running Windows for locally? And sometimes the answer is Outlook, Outlook 2019. But I think everybody, if they put their minds to it, could think of a use case like, well, it would be handy if I had a Windows machine that I could get to on demand. The question is, does that on demand really truly have to live on your hardware, or could it live on somebody else's hardware that is coming to you as a service? Is that good enough? And I think for a lot of people it is.
Well, and that's part of why Apple was able to do this M1 transition. I mean, if you look back 10 years ago, that would have been a big obstacle. Well, we won't be able to run Windows anymore on the machine, and that could have been a deal breaker for a lot of people. By 2020, when the M1s actually came out, I'm sure there's some people that's a problem, but it's a lot less than it would have been, a decade ago. So, there's so it's now gotten into sort of like nice to have for some people, but critical for only a small number of people, and those people probably weren't using Macs anyway.
The panel will continue our discussion in the next edition of Mac Voices, where we finish up our conversation about Apple repairs and then look at Apple's suit against the NSO Group over Pegasus. That's next time on Mac Voices, and I hope you'll join us. Until then, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.